morning. This is Lance Kenmore with the Kenmore team, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's edition of the Tri-Cities Real Estate Update. As always, you can contact me, Lance Kenmore, anytime direct on my cell phone at 727-8977. Or visit us on the web at kenmoreteam.com. Once again, I always like to thank John for hosting and everybody here at the station for working to make this happen. Mr. John McKay, how you doing over there?
Well, doing good, and I just want to point out, if people have been checking our Facebook page, namely starting yesterday, we have a picture of you doing the show.
Oh boy, I do radio because I have a face for radio.
Oh, it's a good picture.
Why are you putting my pictures out there now?
Well, it's better having it on our Facebook than on the wall at the post office.
Okay, absolutely. I will take that. Well, thank you for doing that. No, we've had a lot of feedback from people that have not only been listening to us on the radio, but we've been trying to do a better job of getting the links to the show and the videos out there on Facebook in case people missed it. So thank you for the listeners and the viewers with all of your feedback. It's been a great time for us to share some information, and boy, that information keeps changing daily, it seems like.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've been doing with these COVID-19 updates is talking a little bit about those updates each week and what's going on. And last week's major announcement was we had talked about construction resuming. But as what they called phase one construction restart, when we did the show last week, we had really just gotten word what type of things were coming down the pipeline. And it's one of those things where that announcement came out and then everybody's like, yeah, we're back to work, and they're going crazy. And then, the people that have worked hard to get that reopened are like, hold on, there's some major rules that you need to be following to stay open and make this happen. So just a real quick review for people out there, a real kind of 30,000 feet view of some of those basics that people did not necessarily understand when that order was released. And so during phase one construction restart, which we're in right now, that very key point is that it is low risk construction is how it was defined. And then it went on to immediately say any existing construction projects may resume activities that do not require workers to be closer than 6 feet together. So the existing was the key part about that a lot of people either were ignoring or did not realize. And so you could go back to work on a construction project or site that had started before the stay-at-home order, but you couldn't go out and start new projects yet. So clarification there, that is dicey for some of those situations.
Now, if you pulled permits prior to the start of COVID, you take a lawnmower out there. I started. See, that's how my brain works.
John McKay. Yes, that is how your brain works, and your brain would be very similar to a lot of people that I'm hearing in the community.
But I know nothing, and I work not in the building industry, so do not take my advice.
No, so on existing projects, like you said, very easy to determine if you were halfway through framing before, and then you were shut down. Now you're back to framing.
What defines high risk? I mean, when I'm doing home renovation projects, there's a high risk I'm going to hit myself with a hammer at least once.
Well, McKay, I think you are still allowed to do that to yourself. You can hit yourself with a hammer and we will be okay. But low risk is the activities that maintain people the 6 feet distance apart. So if there's a job that requires two workers to be side by side,
like in a boom truck or something,
that is not being allowed at this current state that we're in. A couple things, key points to hit on that is that each job site has to have a COVID-19 supervisor present at all times during the construction activities, monitoring what is going on, except single family residential job sites with 6 or fewer people on site were exempted from that. So that was a great exemption for them to throw in, because in a lot of the residential side of building, we've got 2 guys out there or 3 guys out there. Maybe, one guy's working on framing and another one is working on electrical, etc. So that way, because it would have been very cost prohibitive, if you can imagine, if there's a site that has 3 people on it, it would be cost prohibitive to hire a 4th person to stand there and watch the other 3. That was the COVID supervisor. That just wouldn't work. So smaller projects, residential, 6 or under, do not require that. However, bigger, larger commercial projects or larger residential projects will need to have that. Obviously, it says that social distancing must still be maintained. They like people to work in shifts and breaks. So if there are more than 2 people in a small confined area, 2 trades that need to be in there, say a sheetrocker and electrician, they're alternating those in shifts to decrease the amount of contact that they have. And then the last thing that I thought was really interesting, buried deep in phase 1, in fact, point number 28. So if you could imagine the scrutiny that now our contractors are under trying to comply with this and get jobs done. Point number 28 says that any worker coming to work on a construction site in Washington from any state that is not contiguous to Washington must self-quarantine for 14 days to become eligible to work on a job site in Washington. So God help you if you had a specialty product like an elevator or an escalator or something that generally you would have a tech, say, fly in from Montana to work on, or maybe a very specific HVAC type of system, those type of things. If they are not coming from a contiguous state to Washington and coming from a state or 2 away, before they can work on that job site under the current restrictions, they're going to have to self-quarantine for 14 days before they can go to that job site.
So this kind of gives you an idea into the mind of people that set these things up.
Yeah,
probably not a lot of real world experience. I'm going to be nice about this.
Yeah, you're going to be nice about it, and I appreciate that. It's a family show. We hope.
Yes. Restraint.
So those are some of the things that are going on. That's what the construction industry is facing right now, and really just trying to keep things moving forward. But it's difficult and costly, and they're experiencing some hardships right now. Now, finally, after weeks of declining horror story news in the real estate markets, a couple of shimmering glimpses of hope that the markets might be turning a little bit, and we're seeing some of that pent-up spring demand. Mortgage Bankers Association reporting this week that that new purchase applications increased 12% last week to the strongest level in almost a month.
Wow.
So it's kind of like we had that massive 5-year low where mortgage applications dropped way off, and now we're starting to see those creep back up. So the 10 largest states all had increases in purchasing activity.
Good.
So potentially a sign of pandemic delayed demand starting to come back, people starting to look more. How does that relate locally? Well, very, very similar type results locally. So last week I had reported there was roughly 517 active listings on the market. We're still within 1 or 2 of that. It was 518 when I ran the numbers yesterday and looked at that. So we're maintaining inventory because we've had a lot more new listings come on the market, and we need those for sure. Just was able to pull some quick numbers together from April. I know we were kind of waiting for the first of the month to look at that. So it's what we talked about and what we were seeing. So 356 closings in March and down to 288 in April. So that is a slow April. In fact, if I go back, I had to go back I went back 5 years before the show to double check. And that is obviously the slowest April we've had in the last 5 years. But good news is that represents about a 20% decrease in closings. And we're trending slightly better than the national average. So national averages were running down about 35%. So we are seeing those effects not be quite as bad here in the Tri-Cities market. And just from an uptick in activity, I talked to a couple of the title companies before the show and getting some notes ready. And this week was when they're really starting to see more new purchase contracts start to come in.
Good.
I think with construction opening up, some of the builders saying we can get those existing projects done, closed for these buyers. We can feel confident now in writing some new purchase and sale agreements. So we're starting to see a very slight uptick in activity again and looking at the purchase side of things. So we're definitely super excited about that. Before I go into my next topic about what's going on, I do always like to get in a celebrity real estate story. We got sidetracked by all the real business that we're having to do on the show. But this gives me a little bit of entertainment during the week. So last week, McKay, do you remember what I reported on who was benefiting from the pandemic and who bought last week? Let's test your memory.
I believe it was Amazon.
It was
Jeff
Bezos.
He bought like an entire building and turned it into a...
Absolutely. So it was really funny to start doing my research this week. And I feel like we're just going down the Forbes richest list during the pandemic. So guess who bought this week?
Well, the first thing that came to mind was the Walmart family, but...
That would be close, but let's think a little closer to home in Washington.
Some guy that owns Starbucks?
Gates.
Okay,
yeah. And you don't see him.
He's been in the news a lot lately.
He's been in the news a lot lately.
Yeah.
I think...
Did he buy another lab?
I think potentially the stress of Corona and the pandemic. I think they needed a relaxation place to go to. So they recently bought in Del Mar, just outside of San Diego. They had a record-setting home purchase, and they paid $43 million for a compound right on the beach. Main house is almost 6,000 square feet, and it has 2 guest quarters that make it almost 10,000 square feet. Wow. Absolutely. You know, they said it's really a marquee property, kind of a landmark property in Del Mar. And it is absolutely stunning. I mean, pool, jacuzzi that seats like 10. I thought the picture of the jacuzzi was the pool. No, apparently with that kind of money, you get very big jacuzzis. So
can you seat 6 feet apart in it?
You can. I
think, knew that was
I think
coming.
This is a social distancing jacuzzi for sure. So really interesting to kind of look through the pictures. It was gorgeous. Looks like a resort, but just kind of funny to see who is purchasing major properties during a pandemic. And, maybe, McKay, next week I go to number 3 on the Forbes list. I can't even tell you who that is, but I will look into that and see what we come up with for next week's show.
Wow.
Well, when we come back from the break, I'm going to talk a little bit about what interest rates are doing right now and kind of coordinate that to what that means during a pandemic. Interest rates versus purchase price and potential drop in value. We're going to look at the pros and cons of that right after the break.
Right here on News Talk 870.
Welcome back to the Tri-Cities Real Estate Update. Today we've been here talking a little bit about our COVID update number 6. I mean, we've been in this for a little while now, and starting to adjust to our social distancing. A lot of electronic contracts, McKay.
I bet.
Going out for our signings, and a new way that we're selling houses though, and we're listing houses. And we've got protocols in place that make that happen because we might have stopped the world for a little while, but summer is coming. It did not stop.
Yeah.
So, and there's people that need to move and there's people that need to buy. So
and people that want to move and
absolutely. And in fact, I've got my pick 3. So we've got some awesome ones this week. And I'm starting off with pick number 1, and this is a little bit outside of our normal metro area, but I'm going to take you to the Lower Valley a little bit. Official address, 1851 Gap Road in Granger. So if you've been looking for that gentleman's farm, this property is a 4-bedroom, 2-bath Rambler, 1854 square feet. It's on 2 fenced acres, move-in ready, really cool design with open beams in the living room, so a lot of natural light there. Big corner wood stove for those winter months that we just came through. Bright kitchen, new countertops, master bedroom has a walk-in closet. And it's just one of those places where it could be set up for your animals. Tons of yard space, timed underground sprinklers, mature landscaping. You've got a gated driveway. So just quarantine yourself in there, lock the gate, and you are solid. People are not getting in. So country living, easy access to the highways. And that's priced at $335,000. So you get a little bit further outside of town, you get a lot of bang for your buck out there. Investor special. So investors, listen up to this one. We don't get these too often. 32 South Moraine Street in Kennewick. Now, this is a newly remodeled triplex. In fact, completely remodeled. New laminate wood flooring, updated kitchens and bathrooms, new vinyl windows. And get this, right now, newly remodeled, and all 3 of those are vacant. They went through and they just totally rehabbed the property. And so, I mean, it looks brand new. You've got unit A and B are 1-bedroom, 1-bath units. And then unit C is a standalone 608 square foot unit that has 2 bedrooms and a newly remodeled kitchen also. Wow. So you're getting a 3-unit triplex, and that's coming in at $269,900. Wow. And so great investor special. Easy way to walk into a project where most of the big work has already been done for you. Yes. And then pick number 3, I'm going to take you over to Richland, and I've got 1210 Van Giesen Street in Richland. So this is one of the historic F houses. So that's the 2-story square with a basement, and it has the cute little dormer windows on it. So those are your F houses over in North Richland. 2388 square feet. It's got those very cool, the original hardwood floors that were in those.
Now, I'm trying to remember, is that east or west of GWA?
That one is going to be... You can't ask me that, McKay.
Well, I grew
on
up
the radio.
I grew up in North Richland off St. Street. So
yeah, you're killing me. You're killing me right now because I didn't write that down.
Okay.
And so you're totally killing me right now on my groove here. But I can tell you that it has stainless steel range and oven, tons of counter space. They have vinyl tile flooring. And fully fenced backyard. A great looking place.
I'm going to say on the west side because that's where most of those alphabet houses were.
Listen to this price though for that. $222,500.
Wow.
So we have 3 amazing picks this week. New inventory, great properties. And it's that under 300,000 price range, really tough in Tri-Cities. And there's been some good inventory that has come on with those for sure. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today was people keep asking about interest rates, and they also keep asking about a market correction because they're like, hey, we're in a pandemic. Our price is just gonna, just fall off the map. Well, they haven't yet. No one knows that for sure. And it's very unlikely that I think we would see a steep decline really, really quickly, partly based upon the amount of inventory that we have here.
It's not like gas and oil, folks.
But one of the things that we've been talking about with people is where rates are now versus where they are. So I went back and looked at the interest rate chart. I just pulled one up from Freddie Mac. This is Primary Mortgage Market Survey. And these are conventional rates. And this past month in April, the average rate on the 30-year fixed mortgage U.S. hit a low of 3.31. So I went back and said, well, where was that at the start of last year? Go back to January of 19.
Okay.
And it was at 4.46. So I said, okay, let's do a quick exercise. Let's run $300,000 borrowed. So if you put roughly 10% down, so let's say you bought 330, you finance 300. So at 4.46 last year, 300,000, that payment is going to be 1512.
Okay.
Roughly 1,512. And this is just principal and interest. We're not talking taxes, but 1512. Right now, that's at 3.31, and that would have the payment down to 1315, almost $200 a month less.
Wow.
So there's a couple ways that you can look at that. When you're looking at a chart that goes back to 2008, and you see that last month was the lowest that you can find anywhere on that chart, it's likely that we're probably in a trough and rates are about to go back up. And there is a million financial reasons that say why in the next, say, 2 years, we could be looking at rates starting to move the other direction and go back up. So I ran some numbers real quick and said, okay, well, let's assume that rates go back to 4.4 or 4.5 like they were in 2019. I mean, I don't think that's a bad assumption. They were a point higher a year ago. Who's to say they won't get back to there again in another year?
Yeah.
So if you were looking at 300,000 today at 3.31 and your payment was 1315, I started playing around with the calculator and said, now fast forward, rates are back up to 4.4. How much could I buy then to keep that payment roughly the same? You couldn't buy 300, but it was shocking. It was 260,000 was the same payment if rates go back to 4.5%. So your buying power in that situation decreases by $40,000.
Wow.
And so a 14% decrease. So if rates go up, but there's a market correction and prices drop, we'd have to see a drop of around 15% for it to be apples to apples. So by having the rates as low as they are now, there's a little bit of a hedge against the market decreasing slightly, potentially. So you've got a balance in that situation. How long am I going to keep that next house? What does that look like for me? If I'm looking at maybe just keeping it for 2 to 3 years, that might not be long enough to make a difference. Maybe in that case, then you would wait for a correction to happen if that's what you thought things were going to go. The other thing you can look at is the next house I do buy, I'm going to keep for 9 years. You know, my kids are a certain age. I'm going to go from elementary till they graduate. That's the house we're going to raise the kids in. Well, then you're looking now at the rates being at historic lows and you're going to hold for 9 years. Maybe you are buying regardless of which direction the market is moving at this point to take advantage of that. So it's really interesting to start to go through those scenarios. That's what we like to do with our buyers out there is now's a great time to jump on a Zoom call and take a look at what's happening, go through some of those calculations, plug that into our spreadsheets and just say, hey, here's what that looks like payment wise. have you talked to a lender? Get them in front of a lender. Get that pre-qualification process started so they can be out there looking when the time is right.
Yes.
But we are still getting a large number of showings, even with the restrictions.
Yeah.
So just a reminder out there, real estate agents and clients, one person with the agent in a home at a certain time, still in effect, still operating under those conditions. So don't be surprised when you order a home inspection and that home inspector needs to be let in by your agent. So what that means is we've been in this window where as a buyer, you're not going to that home inspection because if the agent goes there and the agent lets the home inspector in, we have our two people on the property.
Yes.
And so I know that sounds strange as a buyer. Gosh, I can't go to my own home inspection. Well, there's a couple things that we've offered and been able to do for our clients over the last couple of weeks. We've been able to go in with the inspector. We've been able to get on a FaceTime call, and we've been able to follow the inspector around, use the additional video and phone to show the buyer in real time what we were looking at.
So maybe while they're over at the neighbor's house or they're out on the sidewalk off the property.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And so those are a couple of the accommodations that we've been able to make. We've made all of these adjustments. We're operating safely. We're operating healthily, and we're able to still get these transactions to move forward, get some people into houses that needed to. Mm-hmm. And we've had a number of sellers. We've had a couple of estate sellers. We've had people that are moving for jobs, and we've been able to get those properties under contract, sold, so they can move on to the next phase. So those are a couple of the situations that we've been dealing with. The other thing that is really interesting that we're seeing, and I talked about this about 2 weeks ago, is people abusing the force majeure addendum. There for a while, that was a term that was really thrown around in the media. There was a new form that was created. A lot of people are even advising against not using that form right now. A great scenario that I saw was a seller had entered into a contract to sell to a buyer a month ago, and it was a 45-day close. Buyer's expecting to close in 2 weeks. We get a call, and the seller's like, the seller that was selling, not our seller, represented by somebody else, the seller that was selling. So the other agent calls and says, hey, my seller was going to buy a new house. He was selling this one. He was going to buy a new house. He got furloughed. And so he can't purchase his next house.
No new house. Doesn't sell the old one.
Yes. Well, says that he now needs to extend and cannot sell his current house. Mm-hmm. And we go through the motions, and we're like, that's great, but our buyer already gave notice from their lease, and they are moving, and they are ready to close. Their loan is approved. They have their funds. We're closing at escrow. And so they're like, well, this is force majeure. This has happened. We need an automatic extension. Well, it comes down to what we talked about and warned would probably be coming. Force majeure is an act that makes it impossible to complete a transaction. Now, do I feel awful for that seller? 100% yes. But is it impossible for him to sell, to still fulfill his contract and sell to our buyer? Not
doesn't
impossible.
Sound like it.
He could move to a rental himself. He could move into a motel until those things happen. So there's all of these things, but there's a difference between difficult and impossible, and that addendum does nothing but create confusion in the market.
Impossible would have been a natural disaster that damaged the house beyond repair.
Now, that is exactly what a force majeure event is designed for. The addendum is designed for. That's exactly right.
Like Hurricane Katrina or something.
He could not. So the house was damaged by a natural disaster like that because the stay-at-home order is in place. That's not an existing construction project prior to. It was damaged. There's no way that contractors can get it rebuilt in time to sell to the buyer. that would be an instance of a force majeure event. Exactly. Now, being furloughed and have it be difficult is not the case. So there's just there's so many new scenarios with what's going on, and we are spending hours upon hours looking at these, reviewing these, talking to attorneys, going to construction sites, and so to do the same amount of work that we were doing prior to COVID to get the real estate transactions to go through would mean that you're out of business. We are not. It is like double the amount of work, phone calls, situations, paperwork that we're dealing with. But I'm super fortunate because, like we said, there was a number of less transactions, and we have just a killer team. We have a closing department dedicated to taking care of closing while this is going on. So you don't have one agent working for you. Our transactions, we have 4 agents at a time putting their heads together, finding solutions, making this happen. So if you have any questions about how you can get that same type of service, go to kenmoreteam.com, shoot us a message. We would love to answer your questions, help, and advise through this situation until we get back to a more normal course of business.
Exactly.
In the meantime, we can be reached at kenmoreteam.com. Shoot us a message, and we will be right back here next week.
Right here on News Talk 870.